not. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that looks like
that's right. You can
preview.
Yeah. Watch. We're now live on YouTube.
Adriano, all of you, I owe you.
That's great.
Majorly.
Okay. Preview.
Carolyn, have you had a good couple of days?
We're
now live on YouTube.
Yes, all of you. Yeah, I've had some. Yes, I majorly.
By the way, whoever's got YouTube on, it's going to be on a delay and you're going to get feedback. So you probably need to put that on mute.
Yes, I hear you.
Don't put Zoom on mute, put YouTube on mute. YouTube on, it's going to be on a delay and you're going to get feedback. So you probably need to put it on mute.
Okay, that would be me.
Don't put Zoom on mute, put YouTube on mute.
I will do that.
It's like being in the Grand Canyon with an echo. Lottie, how are you?
Yes, fine, thank you. And you?
Great. By the way, I love your Meg branding. I just love it.
Yeah, it looks very slick.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Initially, I had no idea what it was. I thought it was just some women's magazine trying to sell me something. I thought, okay, Meg, whatever you're saying, I'm happy to buy it. Let's have a look. And then I discovered it was so much more.
Oh, so much more than a women's magazine. Thanks to our Finnish designer. Yes, who's located here to Australia. So she's a good one.
You can't find the mute on your YouTube. Are you on the actual YouTube site right now?
Yeah.
Thanks to our Finnish designer. Yes, who's located here to Australia. So
Can you turn down the volume, perhaps? The mute on your YouTube. Are you on the actual YouTube site right now?
I think I found the mute now.
Okay.
No, I haven't.
Do you need to be on the YouTube channel?
Yeah.
I think I found the mute now. Okay. No, I haven't. All right.
Do you need to be on the YouTube channel?
I'm not now.
Yeah. No, but if there's still in it, it's still coming through, Carolyn. So you must have the volume still on.
All right. So I'm.
All right. Do you need to be on the YouTube channel?
I'm not now. I've closed them all.
But if there's still in it, it's still coming through, Carolyn.
Yeah, I know.
So you must have the volume still on.
Very meta.
is it perhaps on another window? Have you got a secondary window open somewhere?
But if there's still in it, it's still coming through.
I know.
Yeah, I know. So you must have the volume still on.
I can't find where it might be.
Perhaps on another window? Have you got a secondary window open somewhere?
I've got dozens of windows open. I know. How about that?
That sounded good.
That's great.
Oh, that does sound good.
Silence.
Yeah.
Alex, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Adriana. How are you going?
Very great, very great. Mark, nice to meet you as well.
Good to meet you.
Catherine, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Great. I love your plant in the background.
Hang on.
Yeah, the other way. Yeah.
You get two for the price of one.
I didn't need to see the thread count on the bed. I was only looking at the plant. So, Meg, who designed your logo? You said. Oh, sorry, Lottie. Who designed Meg?
Fine.
Lottie. Yeah.
It's not the first time I've been called Meg, nor it's the last, I'm sure. We have a Finnish woman who joined our team last year. Yeah, she's in Australia though. Yeah, she called, Australia's home for her.
Now, Carolyn, do you need to take a moment to catch your breath, or you're okay?
I'm fine to go if you're all ready.
I think we're all ready, but we've got a couple of minutes. Yeah.
Have we?
I think so. A couple of minutes before we start. Can we all smile? I'm going to take a selfie of us all. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Because, socials.
Well, that's right. Yes. Now, Catherine, were you going to have a phone open or something to show when it actually went live on YouTube?
It was live on YouTube. I've closed everything just in case it was me with the
the live feed. Do you want me to open up a YouTube to see any comments or anything that people might write in?
If you want to. I'm rather afraid of asking anybody to do anything at the moment. But if you're all ready, perhaps it would be a good time to start. So hi and welcome to this DIF event. I'm Carolyn from We Teach Well and your host. My job involves putting forward some prompts and then sitting back and letting the teachers run with it. I'd like to thank Kelly Hutchinson and her team for the opportunity to partner with them and provide opportunities for actual educators to talk about what is happening in education. And we have a fantastic lineup today. Alex Box comes from Maths Circles, a platform that brings maths teachers together to delve into thought-provoking maths problems. Lottie Dowling is from MEG Languages, which among other things, supports all language teachers in introducing foreign language programs to their schools. Mark Parry from Parryville Media. Mark was an early adopter of visual technology for education and how the concepts of learning design can assist in instructional videos and the creation of them. Catherine Newington heads up the education section of ACS, the Professional Association for Australia's ICT sector. Her job is creating digital PD for teachers. And Adriano De Prato from A School for Tomorrow, which is a global educational network supporting students, teachers, and school leaders to thrive in a new world environment. And they are all as impressive as they sound. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work, the Yalukut Weelam clan of the Bunwurrung, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which our guests work. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. So 2020 did not introduce online professional learning, but it definitely accelerated it. Unlike all things that accelerate, we don't necessarily have time to test the effectiveness or value. In Edtech speak, 2020 was when educators came up with an MVP, a minimum viable product, and then they continued to iterate. We were able to do things last year that we would never have been able to do otherwise. I could have speak at a conference in Qatar and run workshops for teachers in India. Without virtual, none of those things would be possible. And while Zoom fatigue is a real thing, I still get very excited about the possibilities of the virtual space. So just as an introduction I'd like to throw to each of you, perhaps what was your favorite discovery about virtual professional development last year, if you had a discovery? Catherine, do you want to begin?
Yeah, I think it was just being able to have an ease of access of a variety and various professional development. And that was, I found that the smaller webinars, it was short, sharp information rather than having to spend a whole full day of professional development. So I love being able to have access to variety, access to, states and areas where I wouldn't be able to physically go, and to be able to really pick and mix the type of professional development that I needed for my career advancement.
And Mark, I'm just running along the photos at the top of the screen.
I discovered there was a lot more interest in conferences that were being held online, and so that magically introduced this global kind of phenomenon. Like a Moodle Moot Global was something that I participated in, and that was really cool to be able to, like, time zones aside, which made it a bit challenging. So I really enjoyed that kind of global thing. But also I discovered something called the Edu Reading Group, which I met one of the guy that runs it, Stephen, at a global or a online conference, and then it was a really cool way to do professional development, because there were gaps in my research knowledge and reading kind of practices. So I found that's a really kind of just in time, short, sharp, very collegial. So it's not a grand professional development, but it's definitely something that's held my interest, and it's fun as well.
A few of us are in the Edu Reading group, I think. Adriano, you're next.
Sure.
Business does a lot of PD type virtual things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I suppose from my perspective, I always kind of like to focus a dialogue around the opportunities that are born from moments of struggle or challenge or discovery, as we have had in the last 2 years, particularly here in the state of Victoria. And no doubt, we need to recognise that teachers and students and families have all kind of encountered a bit of a Zoom fatigue and this kind of shift to a continuous learning paradigm or remote learning from a home campus. We know has presented them loads and loads of challenges, particularly around the digital divide that exists, and of course, highlighting many wellness issues, not only for the young people, but for the students themselves. But like I said, I always like to look at what are the opportunities that are born from that. And the advantages that I see for educators in terms of professional learning is not that dissimilar to the advantages I see that has been presented to students. And that, from my perspective, is that technology opens up new learning opportunities and new doors. And just quickly, 5 things that I think I've gained from this last 12 to 24 months being in this particular space in a kind of virtual professional development. Like I said, same advantages for young people. One is that it's definitely provided opportunity for greater flexibility, mobility, and self-paced learning. It's definitely had the potential to build community of inquiry and practice beyond the confines of a school and traditional networks, this kind of broader global perspective. It also has enabled teachers to become more directly involved in their own learning and their own professional growth in more of a bespoke kind of career stage way. That's what I've also noticed. And the final 2 things from me is that there clearly is the potential for a more affordable professional learning in a virtual space when you're reducing travel costs and accommodation costs for the teacher and the school. And finally, it's this notion of kind of real world application of theory, using multimedia, including chat rooms, video, interactivity. Educators can now begin to see how particular education of theories can come to life in the classroom simply by demonstrating specific practices using video theory to make that kind of come to life.
All of those. Alex.
Thanks. So many fantastic ideas, and just gets me also thinking about the different types of online. So like your asynchronous and your asynchronous and synchronous formats and that kind of thing. But for me, I suppose what was quite an important and exciting discovery in 2020 was after the first Maths Teacher Circle was held on campus at Melbourne University, and it brought teachers and mathematicians together to do maths and talk teaching. It was a very tactile approach. We had a lot of maths manipulatives on tables. It was highly collaborative, lots of small group work at round tables and that kind of thing. And then we were planning the second session for April. And of course, we had to decide whether we were going to cancel or were we going to try and move this thing online, and did a bit of research about the capacity for the Zoom, which was the platform we were looking at the time. And we weren't quite sure if we could replicate that collaborative and tactile hands-on nature. And it just worked out that with virtual manipulatives, maths manipulatives, and the whiteboard capacity to share screen and whiteboards and break out into small groups, we were actually really able to replicate that. And so to discover that we could get together in real time with other practitioners to do maths and talk teaching, despite the fact that we were remote from each other, was just a really exciting discovery. And I think we're planning our 9th online session, which is coming up in October. And so that was certainly really exciting, because for me, it's quite important. I discovered last year how important it is for me to be connected with other teachers in real time, alongside other forms of being connected as well. But that's something that I really look forward to and enjoy.
And Lottie.
Goodness me, what's left? So many things. Yeah, I guess the smorgasbord of offerings, because not only did we have, our traditional providers, but I think a lot of edtech companies quickly switched to offering online PL, and very kind and generous educators around the world also quickly switched. So there was this kind of explosion, which was the duality of that is it was amazing. There was a lot on offer. It was also a bit overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people. The other thing I think that was really interesting to observe, and I'd be interested to see how this goes in the future, is that breaking down of the hierarchy. So in this traditional form of professional learning, you pay X number of dollars to go to a conference. There's your expert or your panel up on stage. You probably don't get to talk to them. You might get to talk to the people next to you, or at your table perhaps. And you might never have that interaction with those experts necessarily. With online PL, we've seen a huge explosion of, audio formats and social media, and also experts realizing that they can reach their audience as well through leveraging social media. So, I've been in rooms with people like Angela Myers, who keynote all over, the US, and I've been able to ask her questions. I'd never have that kind of access without this online environment. So that's definitely the pluses for me.
There are heaps of pluses, and I think we could probably talk about them for a much longer time. But if you just picked just one thing that perhaps you found that perhaps didn't work as well as face-to-face, not necessarily something that we can't get around, but just a discovery of, okay, that doesn't work so well. Any of you?
Oh, yeah, I might go.
Yeah.
I guess I come with baggage, I guess. Being a learning designer, I can't actually just do a course for the sheer joy of it. I'm always analysing how have they put it together. So I've had a few kind of bad experiences, just in terms of just poor learning design, really. And so they just haven't got their ducks in a row, or, their kind of assessment doesn't match the kind of instruction, that type of thing. And I mean, I won't identify what that is, but I guess they're out there. There's a sort of a broad range of, positive, really cool, sometimes free professional learning offerings. But then, yeah, some of them I did last year were kind of less than, and I think, and then it's because they're not underpinned often by a pedagogy or, that type of thing.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with that, Mark. I think we have seen this kind of direct shift from, we do what we do in person onto online, and online is a very different environment, obviously. So, really thinking consciously and cognitively about what needs to happen for that online learning to be really engaging. And I know, at Meg, with our teachers, we talk a lot about building in kinesthetic activities to your online activities and classrooms, because, that might not necessarily be something that's kind of thought of in that original learning design. So like Mark, I've definitely experienced some kind of mind-numbingly experiences where I think people have just made some big assumptions, and we haven't had time to really test. People have just had to kind of jump straight into it. But here we are a year later, so hopefully we're starting to see some of those learnings starting to be embedded.
One of those biggest assumptions is that the person providing the learning experience, I'll call it that, makes the assumption that the users have a degree of technical knowledge. And there are many, of course, who are sitting, passively at the other end of the screen, because they've been traditionally go to professional learners, basically sit and get, and they think that's going to happen, but they actually have to now interact in a way that is foreign to them. And for some of them, they might not even have the knowledge around the technology to be able to do that, and to do that effectively to maximize the learning experience.
Yeah. We saw last year a number of new providers entering the online PD space, and not all were run by people who have been teachers or educators. And there were a number of businesses that suddenly came up offering all sorts of virtual solutions to problems for teachers and schools. And some of them, I think you'd have to say, were sort of taking advantage of an opportunity that they thought might make money. But there were also a lot of good ones. And what I'd like to explore is what qualifications or experience do you think is critical to providing good online learning for teachers?
Well, from my perspective, Carolyn, is that the very first thing is that I think this is what Mark touched upon a moment ago, and that's someone who has, as a learning designer and as an educator, has an intimate understanding of pedagogy.
Yeah.
And when you enter into the space, whether it's in person, in context, in country, or online, when you enter the space, the pedagogy has to come first.
Yeah.
And knowing, and a really skilled instructor and educator will know that even for the group that they have online or in person, at different times we deploy different types of pedagogies to meet the needs of that individual learner, in particular of where they're at. And for me, that's got to be the number one skill set of the instructor, not only the capacity to listen and really listen to what's being said between the lines, but as Mark illustrated earlier beautifully, it's the pedagogical piece. In the absence of that, it simply is an experience of a dialogue that's devoid of a purposeful intention in terms of learning outcomes going forward.
Yeah. Catherine, you, in your position, you are, that's pretty much your job, is to create PD for teachers, a digital PD, even before COVID. Have you found, how do you find the teachers respond to virtual PD?
I find that now we're getting to the stage where we do have that burnout. And I think from a presenter's point of view, first off, one of the hardest things I find is it's really hard to read the room because you can't see what's happening. I was co-hosting an event last year, and the main host, he actually froze. And then I was there and I'm like, is everyone still around? And you get these little yeses in the chat, and I was like, right, I'll keep going forward. And so it's really hard in that respect to read the room and making sure that you're going through the content at a speed that they're understanding. And normally when it's face-to-face presentations, you can read the room to see what's going on, encouraging that dialogue and the professional dialogue between your attendees. And then from an attendee's point of view, I find that I can get distracted quite quickly and easily with things as well. And so, I really agree with what was just spoken about the pedagogy too, is that as professional expertise, when you are presenting in webinars and virtual, is that you have to be aware of that lecture style based presentations is a thing of the past. And how do you do that virtually too? How do you get your attendees to be active like you would be in a face-to-face?
Yeah, I always find it interesting and a good thing. I'm not sure where that's come from. When I look at some of your PDs on in your sort of space, you always have the standards, number of the standards that you're going to deal with in that particular session. And to me, I think that gives, it's just that thing. Obviously, this person knows what they're talking about because they're matching it to the standards for teachers that are, national. Do you think
I think that is so vital. And I think that a lot of those companies that weren't looking or kind of new to the playing field weren't aware of the APSL standards and where it sits in with teachers. And because I was rolling out a national program and dealing with teachers right across Australia, I wanted to make sure that we could target that professional development for them and make it meaningful. So when I was writing the description of just the summary of what the webinar was about, I included the APSL standards to ensure that teachers knew exactly where it was fitting in the standards, and especially for those teachers who may not be teaching or need to have that professional development portfolio going all the time, and it comes from my own personal experience as a teacher too, but knowing what to expect on the other side. And what I found easy to get from a teacher's point of view, I wanted to provide that for my audience and my teachers too.
Yeah. And what you want to jump in there?
Caroline, I would just like to come back to the point that you were discussing earlier around who provides PD. And I totally agree. You know, we need to have people with a deep understanding of pedagogy, teaching and learning. But I do believe there is a place for experts to be working in collaboration with our educators or, you know, educators working in collaboration with our experts, you know, one crossing over into the other, and that relationship between, you know, business and, you know, we have, you know, things like VR and, you know, virtual reality. Well, you know, how many educators out there would understand that? But pair them with an educator and you're going to see some pretty amazing learning, hopefully, happening in classrooms and schools. So those partnerships are really important, and really working together between experts, private organisations, businesses, and of course our educators.
I think that's a really valid point, Lottie, because private enterprise and business have been delivering professional learning ad nauseum, right? And so the really successful ones in that space have engaged the services of practitioners who bring expertise around the teaching, the art of teaching and the science of learning into that space. But then those private businesses bring a great backroom of knowledge and skill around how to leverage technology and access to it, because they can scale it a lot quicker than a school could, for instance, or even an individual educator could. So there's enormous value in creating partnerships. And I think that's been a very pronounced outcome of this as a discovery as well, about how schools can continue to look outward and be open to the possibility of partnering. But those partnerships have to be ultimately in benefit of the profession and the educators and the young people in our care.
I can offer a little anecdote that sort of fits in nicely with that. At Maths Teacher Circles, we've had mathematicians come and run tasks with teachers, and that just creates such a beautiful opportunity for us to experience that passion and joy that the mathematician has in pondering a problem and communicating it to us in terms that we can all understand and engage. And we've had the opportunity to ask mathematicians questions about, you know, what they do every day in their work. And this is just, for me, such a big deal as what probably I'll define myself as a formerly quite anxious maths student and primary teacher myself. So, you know, by having these opportunities to connect with people who can help us really understand what an industry involves and perhaps shift some of those perceptions, those negative perceptions in some cases. In maths, it's a real issue.
Yeah.
So just speaking from that experience, I absolutely can relate to, and our work really draws on that, but it very much relies on the collaboration between specialists and teachers in putting those events together to make sure that they do meet the needs of those who are attending.
Can I just ask there, credentialing? I was speaking to Lauren Sayer the other night. We were discussing, and she said that she's finding that her teachers are now looking for PD that has maybe a badge or some credentialing with it, rather than just sort of whether it's conferences or things that sort of don't have quite as neat a learning outcome. How do you think we will work with that going forward? Alex?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm not sure. I'm just going to have to make sense of that one for a moment. Yeah, because I mean, I suppose like the first thing that comes to mind, you know, if we're aligning to the Yates standards and that kind of thing, then I suppose that offers a layer of what we're talking about there. But yeah, I'm not sure if anyone else wants to chime in while I consider that one a little more.
I think,
Yeah.
comes down to the purpose of the PD, right? Why is an educator doing the PD? And if they're doing it because they passionately believe that they want to learn about something, or they see that need in their classroom, they're not going to be worried about necessarily about the, the accreditation. Of course, it always helps to have that accreditation. And we've seen that rise of accreditation through like these sort of badges like Edmodo and Flipgrid, and they have all these levels now. And I see it a lot in the American educators. Perhaps it's just, I'm noticing it more over there. A lot of these ambassadors as well. It's a very interesting trend, because we choose what we value. Do we value a badge that a private company places value in? Well, that's up to us to decide. Maybe it's worth, everything in the world, and maybe it's worth nothing.
I really love what you're talking to there. Yeah, sorry. No, you go.
I was just going to say, that's a really good point, because, when you're looking for badges, are you pushing the product, or are you pushing like the knowledge and learning behind that? And I was having a conversation with my partner the other day about badges within LinkedIn, and they have an expiry date. So, does the professional learning that we actually have as teachers have an expiry date on it too? So, is it something that, every 6 months we have to go back to that particular product, log back in, so we're constantly using it? What value does that actually have? Yeah, are you more towards a product, or are you more towards the teaching and the pedagogy?
Universities have moved to, of course, a model, because they've known that their model for quite some time has been broken. And of course, they've got short units that you can undertake that become credits, and you accumulate them over a period of time, and those credits then form into a degree or a master's of some kind. And that's a very credential or badge philosophy. I'm just not convinced that credentials and badges is the only way to go in this particular space, because I kind of agree with you, Lottie, that we've got to start thinking about what we value here, and do we have to measure every single thing? If my motivation is I'm going to choose that professional learning because it's going to give me this badge, I'm not convinced that that's a sustainable approach, because it's a bit like our students. Are grades the only way to kind of incentivize them? Ultimately, the most successful young people in my care I've ever seen are ones who are intrinsically motivated to simply be better than they were yesterday. And that's where you see the biggest learning gains. And I would imagine adults are not that dissimilar in that frame of mind. I feel they have a strong place, and absolutely, if I was undertaking some leadership type program, and eventually I'm thinking about my career in education and I want to develop that skill set, and I know that I need an entry point of a master's of some kind, if that credentialing can support the credits towards that, I see real value. But there has to be a balance between just simply the encounter and exchange that happens with really good learning.
I wasn't thinking about it at all in a graded way. We work in a very niche area where we work with English teachers, particularly out of field English teachers who don't have deep subject knowledge. And so they may do a number of modules on a Shakespeare unit, or on teaching fiction or poetry, and having a note somewhere that they have completed this amount of work on that, that they can then build up and, well, actually, I've got that. I don't need to do that one again. I wondered how useful that will be for teachers just in when they're filling out their re-registration, which in Victoria we've all got to do in the next 2 weeks, to prove what professional learning they've done in the year. That was more what I was thinking.
In New South Wales and ACT, as a provider, you have to register with both of those government agencies. And, teachers in New South Wales, so they've got, that certain amount of professional development that they have to do per year. That can be anything and open up. But there is, I think it's about 20 hours a week, 20 hours a year possibly, that they have to do that is a NESA registered provider. And I've gone through the whole process of filling out all of the forms, and it's really extensive. And it means then that NESA have a bank of providers where they know it's aligned to ATSL standards, it's aligned to better pedagogy and current research practices too. And so NESO knows that some professional development that New South Wales teachers are going to be doing is going to be quality.
Some of these issues do align with, again, from a learning design perspective, one of the huge advantages to descriptors or ways to kind of measure or organize is that you're getting right from the get-go a really considered approach. It's not just an ad hoc, broad kind of area. So when you've got an offering like a course or a little piece of learning or something, just as a standard, it's easy to identify exactly what purpose is that, how does it fit in. Someone might use that information to decide to do something or not. And then when you have kind of these accumulate, then teachers over a long period of time can start to kind of see a pattern, or they can flesh out their kind of portfolio. So I guess I tend to think of it from a kind of designing a course type approach, but I mean, I can understand there's sort of badging and other stuff right down the other end of the spectrum. But I think ultimately they are a good idea, because it's a way to wrangle and kind of manage all this information, or the knowledge, or the skills, or the outcomes, or the competencies, or a whole range of things that are, learning and teaching is awash with.
And sorry, go on.
So that links, to this idea of formal and informal PD. We know that people are listening to podcasts and watching vlogs and learning possibly a lot more from their informal PD, their choose your own adventure PD, than they are from sitting in a course that was potentially chosen for them, or they chose themselves, and is giving them the hours. And I'm not saying that the quality, I'm not sort of, to your point, Catherine, that the quality, I know those quality of those courses is great because it is accredited, but it doesn't mean that the quality of all the informal offerings is not necessarily there. It's a wash with many different types of offerings, and some of them are not amazing, but there is some very good informal PD out there.
And I hope people are listening to podcasts, Lottie.
Me too.
So do I.
And reading blogs.
And reading blogs, exactly.
Like the podcasts, so I really never realized how good podcasts were until we started one. It is the best fun doing a podcast. We were last week, 10 days ago, we were at the Edtech conference, which was online this year. It's that sort of monolithic, massive thing that happens where there are too many people and too many things, and you just, my head explodes. And it was online, which was absolutely great. One of the things that came out which really made me feel good was that in a number of sessions I was in, people were talking about the importance of teachers. And because we've been on the periphery of EdTech for a while, I've seen lots of these new techs, and they talk about teacher proofing, and they talk about, they can do this and you don't need to do that. And for the first time, I was hearing some of the significant people in the EdTech arena talking about how teachers are irreplaceable, and how no matter what kind of learning you do, our focus must be on supporting and upskilling teachers, because the students don't do good learning if you take that human relationship out. I found that really exciting. Has anyone else here felt any changes in the way that teachers are viewed when they provide professional development or different programs for other teachers?
I can chime in there, and sort of builds a little bit on what Lottie was saying before about the informal types of learning that we're doing alongside our formal PD, which I think just the power of conversations, so that the ability to connect with other practitioners and have conversations. And so when you're in a PD, there's obviously some fantastic content there to be sparking those discussions. But it's just interesting to reflect on, even in the online settings where I've had the opportunity to actually have a conversation with another teacher or a small group of teachers in a breakout room. And often it's there are actions that I take as a result of those conversations, not necessarily from the content that's being presented. And so I guess it just taking a moment to really acknowledge the vast experience of every practitioner that comes along to a session, and figuring out ways of leveraging that so that we do have those opportunities to connect and offer different perspectives and insights that then potentially spark action or are relevant to individuals, regardless of what it is that, they're both attending the same session. So they have a general shared goal of some sort. But just to acknowledge the expertise in the room and figuring out ways to leverage that, I think is just something that, I think a lot about and I think is incredibly important. Anyway, I could talk all day about that, so I'll stop there and let someone else.
It's that idea that, and maybe it has already changed, but I know when I was teaching and we heard that we were going to have another professional development session, and we all groaned a lot. And what we wanted to know is who was delivering it. Was the person delivering it a teacher who understood what a teacher was and did, or was it a guru or someone who is a keynote speaker at a number of events, but maybe doesn't work on the sort of in the detailed stuff that teachers are looking for when they go on professional learning? Does that clarify the question at all, or just make it more confusing?
Caroline, I'd like to just address with that question this aspect that we touched on earlier about that sort of partnership with private, businesses or edtech companies or that realm, because ultimately they're businesses and they have to survive. And if they're not providing a good product, people aren't going to buy it. So I think schools and, educational institutions are becoming much more aware that if you send in someone that, can show you all the bells and whistles on a product, but doesn't actually understand how to use it in the classroom, how to, consider the pedagogy and the teaching and learning and how to kind of, work with students, then they're not going to get those people back again, right? So yeah. I think that we are seeing edtech companies, businesses using hiring more educators, and I think it's coming from them being more educated, but I also think it's coming from a place of survival for businesses too, because they're realizing that, to make their product the best product that it needs to be, they need to have educators on staff.
Oh, yeah, and that's a major move forward, I think. All right, moving forward, what does very useful, empowering virtual PD look like?
Well, I think that's a really important question, Carolyn. From my perspective, empowering virtual PD must understand that learning is fundamentally about encounter and exchange, in my opinion. Encountering new learning that challenges, stretches, and awakens, while also being practical for my everyday practice. Yeah. And that exchange component that I just touched upon, that is highly relational between colleagues, and it creates an opportunity, and an important opportunity for dialogue with the other, because we always have to remember that we're so much better together. So my kind of 5 tips, I would say, around this notion of encounter and exchange about empowering virtual professional learning is, 1, you've got to meet the educators where they're at. So vary your content to account for the different kind of levels of technology comfort and also knowledge. 2nd, don't overplan this. Have an outline but be open to the learning to go into different directions depending on your cohort or your individual. That's really good. That's the skill of a really good teacher, right? Use the attendees' experiences. I mean, your best resources are right there in that virtual space. So ask participants to share their experiences, their pitfalls, their challenges, but their ideas and their successes. The fourth is, I always like to find opportunities to celebrate teachers. Educators have been put through the ringer these last 2 years, and that many feel kind of dejected. So make sure that you take the time to celebrate their accomplishments and the lessons that they have learned in this process, because teachers are simply remarkable. And my final thing is, incorporate some fun in it. Like, learning should be enjoyable, even for adults. Incorporate gamification, trivia, giveaways, boost their spirits in some capacity, because we've got to have a deep appreciation that the educator who's participating in that online scenario may have just spent 6 hours delivering remote learning from their home, where they're also taking care of their own children's learning experience. And, they're over it, And so how can we make that an experience that is memorable? And that's why I use the words encounter and exchange, because it's not a one-way thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the elements just introduced tap into some adult learning principles, which are always a good foundation for any kind of planning of professional learning. And even more, like over the last couple of years, from my observation, they're really important, and they're often overlooked, but they're kind of, the fundamentals are there. I particularly like the kind of having input from the participants, that where possible, to help shape the experience, because it's acknowledging the value of the individuals and in their role as teachers. And if the course or the offering or the event can be designed to incorporate those perspectives, then that's, in my view, it's really good design. And I mean, that's just one adult learning principle. There's a whole bunch of others. So yeah, I kind of would actively, would encourage that kind of approach, because you'll get a better outcome. It's more enjoyable. Learning can be fun. It should be designed for adults. Sometimes there's an assumption that, there's kind of like there's teaching and there's teaching that, there's not an acknowledgement of the audience, maybe. And so adult learners have different requirements to younger learners. So I know a lot of people maybe that are offering PD out there don't acknowledge that. So I could talk all day about this, but I think human-centered is a really valuable concept, especially now, because it's kind of, there's so many computer-based offerings. People respond. It's a social experience. Chickens are social creatures, so are human beings. And so, I think there's a great opportunity at this moment in time to make, even this event now, we're surrounded by technology, yet somehow that human connection is getting through. Tone of voice. I can see Lottie having a little body language moment there. It's all these elements, which is great, I think. And it's sort of, I think if these can be refined, I've noticed that some of the vendors like Teams, MS Teams and Zoom, etc., those bells and whistles have started to get improved. So, I mean, they're needing to lift their game and, embed functionality. So it's those little bits and pieces that are the key to improving professional development and refining and iterating, essentially.
I said right from the beginning, when we first sort of started thinking about this way back, that whatever we do has to be fun, because chances are teachers are going to be doing it in their own time. And so it's got to be enjoyable. Stephen Colbert said something, I get those ones mixed, the other day when we were talking about the value of conferences. And he said something that I think applies very much to PD. He said, we need to send something out. What you do is you send something out beforehand. We're going to be talking about this. So do this task. And then, so when they come together, they work on those tasks, share those tasks that have been done by people who are coming to the event. And I thought that actually is probably a really sound way to introduce something, because you are going to take what they've done on and then deal with that in the workshop rather than just prescribing what you're going to talk about.
They're also going to understand the why, right? And I think that that's something that we have to be so cognizant of as PL providers, is that the participants in that room need to understand why they're doing this thing. I talk a lot about global citizenship and providing that context. I mean, who cares about being a global citizen? What does that even mean? But if we understand what that means and the nuts and bolts, then we might, appreciate the next 2 hours or 30 minutes. And yeah, making sure that it's, making sure it's also relevant, obviously. Yeah.
One of the things that I think is really important is to give teachers and the participants time to think about how they're also going to implement it into their teaching and learning practices going forward. One of the things that I've always done when I'm running face-to-face sessions is always leaving that last hour for teachers to collaborate together and do the next step. So they can talk about how they're going to implement the digital technologies curriculum going forward. And it means then that we can actually see the lessons that they've learned and the knowledge that they've learned. Well, now they've actually got time to implement it into their teaching and change their teaching too.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, Catherine. From my perspective, I think, Lottie, you touched upon this early in our conversation. There are still many educators that mistakenly assume that the online learning should mirror what happens in the classroom learning environment. And so if we're then thinking about how do we dispel some of those misconceptions, because those misconceptions are not going to allow teachers then to leverage the benefits of technology in a more kind of effective, engaged way. So my thinking is that it's not just about offering professional learning digitally to people around particular topics. I think the real thing that's going to need to have an investment in is how are we going to offer professional learning for teachers to learn how to teach in the virtual environment space. And I genuinely believe that improved PL in that space around online instruction may make us actually better and more explicit communicators and more effective teachers in the long run, because there's a different brevity that we have to deliver in this space than we would if we had our 60-minute lesson. I know that there are some schools that still believe that they've got a lecture style happening and kids have to sit there for the entire day and they have to listen to teacher after teacher. I mean, that's just crazy practice, not really great for anyone's well-being. But I just feel that that's the missing ingredient here. It's one thing to be able to provide learning opportunities in this space, because that's the world we're now living in and the circumstance we might find ourselves in, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales currently. But we need to really invest on developing their skills on how to learn in that space and then how to teach in that space.
I'm very cognizant of two things. One was that I got an email from a message from Adriano saying that he had read the prompts and had prepared some things that he wanted to say to do with that. And then a recurring idea that's come up here about taking advantage of the people in the room. And so what I thought would be a good thing to do now is do exactly that and throw it to the room to talk about each of you. What are your thoughts on this whole online professional development thing, what it looks like, who runs it, how will it be structured, anything?
Well, bring it on. It's already happening anyway. I guess I've got my background. I've sort of been in this space for a while now, since the 90s. And so a lot of what we're experiencing now in terms of this sort of video moment, and then even handheld devices like the iPhone, which is, 15 years ago or so now. But they were always in the future, like, oh, imagine if they happened. And so because we're surrounded by them now, it's like there's a bit of a lag. But to me, it's just amazing that it's there's so much potential in terms of doing it And I guess to me, I like the simple version is to unlock it is to just focus on the consideration and the planning, and definitely have the pedagogy, if not the andragogy, first, to kind of, because sometimes the technology is great and we couldn't do all this without that technology. And vendors are great too. We couldn't do it without a lot of those technology vendors. However, because we're in a learning and teaching human system, it always start with the pedagogy. And so that's often linked to learning outcomes. I really like Lottie and her reference to the why. Why are we doing this? Teachers are a tough crowd sometimes. I've found in my humble experience over the years, they don't always take kindly to instruction, but they do take kindly to a peer kind of like sharing and caring type moments and comparing notes, even sharing war stories, that type of thing, a collegial type of vibe. And so I just think it's all those things, like structured. It needs to be structured, because that's one of the things from what I remember in the olden days of distance education. That was the number one thing you needed to do, was to structure it for the learner, because not everyone's self-directed. And so, and then there's also this idea of, what do you call it? I tend not to say asynchronous and synchronous, but you know what I mean. It's stuff, there's huge potential to unlocking a lot of this with more asynchronous assets. That doesn't mean the computer will teach the students. It's more just getting the blend right, so that you do stuff, as you mentioned earlier, maybe do a little homework task or a pre-learning, and they bring that to the moment. And then there's all this nice exchange between people. So, but all of this stuff is just really learning design or pedagogy, planning. Sometimes there's not a lot of time to do that planning, but, you know, I think we're often running, and it's going to continue. Cognitive overload's a really important thing, but I mean, it's kind of, and that's why these sort of forums are so important. It's just to kind of exchange ideas and, you know, brainstorm, see what's working, see what's not. I'm Mark and I'm done speaking.
Lottie, do people still use Clubhouse?
Yes, believe it or not. There's a conference coming up.
Is that that on the phone, Doovie, what's it, audio thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's an audio only format, just like Twitter Spaces, essentially, but it's its own platform. Yeah.
I haven't got on. There was a rush about it at the beginning, a whole lot of people on a couple of groups saying they were doing this thing on Clubhouse. And at that time it was only for iPhones, and I have an Android. So, but by the time they brought it out for Android, people had sort of settled down a bit and weren't talking about it so much.
Moved on.
Maybe moved on. Does anyone else want to jump in response to Carolyn's question a moment ago that Mark responded to?
I want to hear from everyone else about what you think.
Well, I've been thinking. Oh, sorry.
No, you go first.
Well, I'll be quick. Something that I've been thinking a bit about and talk quite a bit with others in pondering this stuff is this idea of the opt-in. So, you know, where you actually, because teachers being so pressed for time and having probably quite different goals depending, you know, to other people in the school, or so having the permission and the time to actually seek out and find the PD or, you know, the learning opportunity that's going to be right for you. And I think the first step to engagement can often be just, you know, wanting to be there in the first place. And if you're in a place that you don't want to be and you think is a waste of your time when you are so time poor, perhaps this is a consideration when we're thinking about what are the elements of PD going forward, whether it's in the virtual space or not. That is something that, I think a bit about, and how we can make that happen more for teachers.
Yeah, I'd still love to continue doing virtual PD, just to be able to connect with so many more teachers and educators out there. You know, there's been some international teachers that have been able to connect with some of the work that I've done. It may not be directly related to what they're doing, but there's that content to be able to empower them some knowledge. And even just thinking about when I do go back to face, to be able to somehow hook it up virtually, so those people who aren't physically able to get there can still be part of that professional development. What that looks like, I don't know. But, you know, I think it would be something that I would really consider, to have that live, you know, the face-to-face and the virtual part of it too.
Oh yeah, as they say, the future is now, right? We're already living it, as Mark has said, and I think that ship sailed. We have these offerings, whether they're formal or informal, whether we're consuming these informal PD opportunities as we hang out the washing or do the dishes as we work from home, or we're sitting in a course or doing a self-paced course online. I mean, the explosion of the online free and not free courses is also, you know, an incredible space of what's out there. You can kind of learn anything for free nowadays, and in that space alone. In the AITSL report in 2014, where it talked about the 5 horizon trends, and one of them was open, and it talked about unregulated environments, open, unregulated environments. And, you know, I mean, that has been here for some time, but the pandemic really accelerated that, like many things. And it talked about the possibilities of people globally to come online and solve problems. And I mean, that is something that and complex problems. And it is something that I do see in some of these more informal spaces is I see people from all parts of the world in Twitter spaces rooms or in Clubhouse rooms. We see it, you know, also in Facebook groups, people solving and helping each other, educators helping educators. So there's an incredible powerhouse movement going on informally outside of the kind of formal PL. I think also we talk about, you know, teaching our students to be lifelong learners, to develop the skills of the future, to be able to learn, unlearn and relearn. And, you know, as educators ourselves, as PR providers, we have to be vulnerable and be in that space ourselves as well, be learning all the time, if we're going to be providing relevant PL to people.
It's interesting that so many of you now have highlighted that this space has been around for quite some time. I mean, the young people in our cares have been experts at YouTube for many, many years now, and have profited from them. The amount of students that I've had in the past that have over 1 million followers on their platform and are profiting from people just simply watching them play video games and stuff like that, or actually using it for instruction, has been around for ages. We look at people like the great Eddie Wu, who has got over 1 million followers. And I would imagine that so many people that subscribe to his channel are not just limited to students. I would imagine there are maths teachers and practitioners around this entire country in the world that look to what he provides as an example of how to connect with young people, how to build a relationship, and how to make explicit teaching fun, enjoyable, and cut through. In my own context, I've been a visual arts teacher for 26 years. So the use of technology in some form of art and design is hand in glove, right? It's part of the nature of the course. So watching young people create video artifacts or audio artifacts or other digital kind of imagery as outcomes and as communication tools has been part of what we do. As a visual arts teacher, I've been creating digital resources for students for a very long time. Not because I just think it's important for them to have access to that, you know, play, record, pause, and whatever when they haven't caught up in class. But I'm also very conscious of the student in my class who may have experienced some type of mental illness and has a prolonged absence in my class. I had to think very carefully many years ago, how do I best support that young person in their learning to meet them where they're at? And it was through instructional video or audio that enabled them to access it wherever they were at any given time. I think, though, what's different now is that those things were from the initiative of industry and also some very kind of innovative teachers who embrace that type of technology as part of their whole pedagogical toolkit. And making sure that there was about the question of equity, that everyone had access to really good instruction if they were absent and so on. You know, if I've got a dyslexic student or other students with neurodiverse needs, how do I best cater for them? Instead of large slabs of text, I'm going to provide them with an audio file and so on. What I think is different now is that learning in this space is becoming an expectation and becoming more explicit in this space. And I think that's the part that might frighten some educators, because it's actually going to shift them dramatically out of a comfort of the way they've always learned. I mean, I know school leaders who much prefer to go on a junket for 3 days, and it's not the learning that they're interested in, it's the stuff in between that they're interested in, their lunches, the after drinks till midnight, the collegiality that occurs in their particular cohort. And now they're having to abandon all that, right? And having to focus on the learning. And so I just feel there is a shift in mindset.
I wonder, one of the things that I miss terribly about not teaching, apart from the students, is the staff room. That's the thing that we don't have online as easily. And I've been giving some thought to how can we create some sort of virtual staff room?
This is like a little staff room. I've never worked with any of you, but I get the staff room kind of vibe.
That's right. But these are not happening on a regular.
They could.
No one's whinging yet, Mark. So it's not a true staff room yet.
Yeah.
I'll never hear the end of that comment. Go on.
I was having a discussion with a young teacher yesterday about the difference she's gone to a new school, and the difference is like she said it's like chalk and cheese. Everything was dark at the old place, no support, whereas she's now in this amazing staff room full of English teachers, and she said it just makes you want to go to work every day. And that's the thing we're trying to work out. How do we sort of create a space that people can know is there, that they can sort of drop into and have these conversations without waiting for me to stuff up the tech again and try again next year in the hope that one day I'll get it right.
It was a collaborative moment, as I remember.
It was very much a collaborative moment.
I think Mark's right here, Carolyn. This is a staff room.
Mm.
This is a space where people are coming together, and sometimes this is now a space where people come together to socialise and to build community in a very different way and in a very intentional way. And it's also a space that people come together to collaborate around learning, leading, living, working, all types of different things across every industry. And apart from the pandemic of a digital divide and access to bandwidth and the technology, which I think is a real issue that we need to address as a system and even as a country, as blessed as Australia is, there are huge upsides with this, because this connects us in a way that as Lottie mentioned earlier, there's no hierarchy in this. I mean, I don't want to embarrass you so much, Lottie, but Lottie, you're an amazing exponent on a platform like Clubhouse. You've got an amazing skill in being inclusive, a skill that allows each person to have a space and their voice. And also, you've done a bit of work about each person. You've done a bit of research about them. So you actually make them feel valued and known. And that's the strength of a staff room, right? You build relationships over time. You develop a bit of an insight about that individual. And then when you come into a space like this, you can have that exchange and encounter of learning and ideas in a really pronounced way. And I can only just see so much upside to this when we to a model that has a balance between an on-campus learning experience for the young people and teachers, in context one, in country one, and this as well. I think if this was the only delivery model, I think that would become a little problematic over time. But there's great advantage here.
Mm. I am.
Sorry, Caroline. In the Edu Reading group, some of us are part of, it's getting a lot of plugs today, isn't it? The paper that we read a couple of months ago was actually on teachers' use of social media, and something in it that I engaged with that I hadn't previously thought about was how much of your engagement is public versus private. So when we kind of dug into that, it's like, back channeling the comments. If you're even on a Zoom, you can have that back channeling as well. And I think some of us came to the conclusion, or I certainly did, is that I think I often get more from the ongoing, you have these, for example, this Twitter group, and, I take part in other regular Twitter chats, monthly chats, weekly chats. I often get more out of the in-between than the actual event itself. I get a lot out of the event, but it's the in-between, it's the collegiality, it's the incidental learning, and it's learning from educators globally. Maybe they're in Australia, they're all over Australia, but they also are globally, who just come with so many different perspectives and resources and ideas. So the in-between learning, I think, is something that is so valuable.
And that was what a staff room provided, wasn't it, in a lot of ways, particularly if it was subject specific.
We've come full circle.
I just know that I would feel very reluctant to try and sign you up for one of these every month or every couple of weeks for a staff room. But yeah, there's got to be a way of working it out, because this is good.
Yeah, because there's a bit of a, like, again, sometimes like a maths equation, this sort of designing a course where the content is an important component, but then there's also the kind of the activities, the assessment, the exchange of ideas, the structure, the kind of, there's 50 sort of elements, I guess. And so, yeah, it's kind of worth a red hot go just to get that happening in this sort of environment. But I guess it gets back to the what are the learning outcomes, or how does one structure it, or what's the duration even? Is 1.5 hours ideal, or maybe it's 15 minutes, or but all of those are good discussion topics to try and achieve an aim, I guess.
One of the other groups that Stephen runs is called Teach Meets. And we had, I think maybe 3 or 4 of those before I was at 3 or 4 before lockdown last year. And almost every one of my education contacts now are virtual. I've never actually shared the space with these people. Catherine and I share space often, but to drink coffee and talk. But yeah, all of my education contacts are now I've met online, which I find really interesting. It's a very different dynamic, but I like it. We just need to make it happen more often.
Can I just add another thing? One of the things that during 2020, one of the things that the Edu Reading Group did actually reinvigorate is I realised I was missing the culture of teachers. And so, which is a little bit ironic, because I've taught in corporate and I've taught in TAFE and taught in, lots of different universities, but there's something about the kind of teacher educator type of vibe. And then that I recognized it strongly in the reading group from all the banter. And then, so I made a decision to kind of seek out more of that. So in my current role, I'm awash with teachers all around and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I kind of think it's come up a few times about valuing teachers as a kind of thing. So I think that's kind of noteworthy. And, I'd like to see that momentum continue, definitely.
Mark, someone in the chat, in the YouTube chat, Vanessa Noonan from the Links Sheldon Academy in Queensland has asked you a question, actually, and that is there a particular framework or link that you could share or recommend relating to adult learning principles?
The short answer is no. I don't know. It's like, this is terrible. I ain't no researcher, as I say
time
to
for
a lot
your
of people.
book, Mark.
Pardon?
Time for you to write a book.
It's just, if you Google, I've got a little YouTube clip myself about adult learning principles, but there's not too many of them. But it's like, I don't know. I'm not big on research. There are frameworks around, though. I don't want to diminish the value.
Can you share that little video? If you've got a little video, can't you share it?
Yeah. Where do I paste
If you pop it in this chat, then we can pop it into the YouTube chat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will look for it while I hang on. Someone else keep talking.
Talking also about the staff room and the teachers. My job, I'm the only one who does my job in the company, so I'm already restricted because it's just little old me. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure was have that connection with teachers. So, the program started when I first started my role at ACS, and I molded it in there. And I said, I want to have that connection with teachers to ensure we keep that dialogue going like that staff room, because I've really missed it. And I don't want to sit in an office on my own making all of these assumptions about what's happening in schools. I want to be there with the teachers, and when I can, actually visit them and see their school and be with them, sometimes to even team teach. And it's really the thing that the advantage of that is that I've all the resources and the professional development and the units of work that we have been created have all been test driven by teachers, given feedback on whether they're actually valuable or not. So it's about having that professional dialogue that I can't have anymore because I'm not in a school, but I'll certainly try and bring teachers into that professional dialogue.
The biggest advantage for me in the business, and I think the thing that keeps me working on it, even though I haven't worked out how to make any money out of it, but the thing that keeps me going is that I realize that apart from my sons, twins, teachers are my favorite people. They are the people I enjoy talking with the most, who I like. I trust. I think I do trust more than almost anybody else. So working out a way of creating that is something that I'm continually working on. And Lottie, I'm going to be sending you a little message at some point saying, can you tell me a little bit more about this Clubhouse thing?
Oh, I bet you're going to give me some homework to do. Always up for some homework.
I don't, I mean, I'd like to find a method of, I'm trying to, I moved away from Facebook and don't do Instagram. And so I'd like to find some way of creating a space where teachers can talk to each other, but that's not as you don't get pictures of people's lunch, and I don't really care what you had for dinner,
I just wanted to say, I think, Catherine Newington, you had a really important point about being in contact with educators, because education is rapidly changing. I mean, the narrative that, it hasn't changed in 100 years. And again, that duality, yes, it kind of hasn't changed, but it is also rapidly changing. The difference of, a few years, if you're out of the classroom a few years, like I haven't taught in classrooms for a few years after many years in classrooms. And I try and get out to schools as well as much as I can, because things are changing so quickly. It's just so important for us to kind of be in there with our fellow educators and learning from them as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like I've been out of the classroom for 3 years, and you think, well, since, COVID hit, and how different it would be if I was to go back into the classroom now. And I think that when we're providing professional development and, professional resources to teachers, we want to make sure that, the pedagogy, the resources are all current and mirror what is happening in schools now too. And I think, that the teachers, and, there's only a couple of teachers that will give me constructive feedback. It's always, teachers, we're very, very positive people, but I've got 1 or 2 teachers who will give me constructive feedback. And, it's almost like they're stepping on my toes because they think they might offend me. And I'm like, but it's about creating resources that will best suit you. And if I can change something just a little bit, or put a table or a section or a paragraph in a different spot to make your life easier, that's success that's measured with my job.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people, you have again been very generous with your time, and while I'd like this staff room to go into Friday night drinks, which is always the best part of staff room, I realize that you all have other places to be and other things to do, and I am inordinately grateful for your time and your perspectives on this topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you all.
Yeah, nice to put faces to names.